Hi universe, welcome to Livestream Your Business with Sonya, and today is already episode 4. Oh my god, still exciting because okay, last week we skipped it because of online World Summit for live streamers with Sonya and our distinguished guest today, Larry Roberts. You know him and all of his actions in the live streaming world. You know, and yes, no doubts. And when I read his biography, it is like I don't know. The one that I love in it is the charismatic Larry Roberts because not all of the podcasters are charismatic. Larry, welcome to Live Stream Your Business with Sonya. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for
And
having me. This is great. It is funny you mentioned the charismatic thing. It's kind of funny because I'm really more of a kind of I don't know. Am I a quiet guy? I don't know. People that know me may say I'm quiet
I don't
sometimes,
believe you if you are
but
quiet.
but I do tend to thrive on attention. I'll be honest. Let's do a confession. And yeah, I don't mind being the center of attention sometimes. Sometimes.
Yes, sir. Because that those words are the ones that gets me. You know, it is very catchy compared with the that you are what is it, bestseller author. You have many programs. You see, so that is the one that I always remember from you. And yes, of course, this is really great to have you here. I feel very honored. And thank you for sponsoring me at that time in Online World Summit for live streamers with Sonya, even though you couldn't make it. Because because like I don't know. I don't want to mention it. Let you mention it.
Oh, it's fine. We could definitely mention it.
Mm.
My temporary tooth got messed up. So
Uh,
you may not know the fact that I'm going through the process of having my entire mouth redone. The
mm-hmm.
top's finished, the bottoms. I'm still working through the bottoms. I've got
Yeah.
a temporary gig in right now, so it's making me talk a little funny. But yeah, I couldn't make my appearance at the World Online Summit because, I was
Mm-hmm.
partially toothless at the time. So I had a very difficult time putting myself on camera and not having at least a fake tooth in place. But it
Uh-huh.
was a pleasure. I'm glad that I had the opportunity to sponsor the show. I'm glad it went
Thank
over
you so much.
extremely
Really, you
well.
helped me a lot and support me a lot in it. Yes, thank you.
And that's the goal is just to help everybody in the community. I know, podcasting is one of those things that the community is so tight and everybody in the
Mm-hmm.
community wants the same thing for everybody else. There's not really this competitive nature to the industry. Sure, everybody wants their own show to do well, but at the same time, we want to look side by side, look to our left, look to our right, and see that our peers, our coworkers per se, are doing
Mm-hmm.
just as good as we are. And I love that. And every chance I get to give back to the community and help those that are doing the same thing that we're doing each and every day, I want to take full opportunity and take full advantage of that opportunity to help and support as much as possible.
Yeah, and I agree with it. You know what? Your colleagues today paged me saying that Larry's friend is my friend, so I was really feel warm about it. You know that then I have more friends who support me in this. Just Carrie, if you are there, hi there. So now you know me in the camera. And yes, we talk behind about you, of course, a little bit, just a little bit, just a little bit.
Talk about my course. Is that what you asked about?
No, no, I mean, just Carrie sent me message saying that Larry's friend is my friend too, something
Oh,
like
Josh
that.
Carey reached out. Josh
Yeah,
Carey
that's why I
is
say hello to
spectacular.
him
Yes.
now. Now he knows me on the camera, so yeah, that's why we talk a little bit, only little bit about you. Don't worry, we talk behind about you, but in a good way.
In a very good way. Josh is tremendous. He's one of the co-founders of Podmax. I love
Mm.
my Podmax family. They are tremendous, and working with them and being a part of what they do is a real honor and a real treat. Josh is just he's top notch, man.
Yeah, and I think he has an event also there. Yes, the in-person event, right?
I'm sorry, an in-person event?
Uh, In-person event. I mean, he has an event also sometimes there, right? And this is like
Yes.
in-person person.
Yeah, they have Podmax, and although it
Mm-mm.
has not been in person over the last year and a half or so,
Mm-mm.
just due to COVID, right? We can't have very many
Mm-hmm.
live events these days. They switched and they were going online, but there are definite plans to bring back the live in person Podmax events, and it's going to be amazing. It's going to be super powerful when they bring it back. They've man done a tremendous job of bringing the community together and shaping the community in a way that once again demonstrates the power of
Mm-hmm.
everyone working together and everyone creating this synergy to where we support each other and lift each other up. And Josh Carey and Eric Cabral and the Podmax family, they've done a tremendous job of making that happen.
Wow, that is really, really amazing. And thank you for lifting me up also in your video. How do you know that I work hard?
I know you work hard. You're working all the time. You're one of those that I
Oh
see everywhere, every day.
my
Anita
God.
Sonya is out there. She's live streaming. You did 100 days in a row. I mean, that is an amazing accomplishment. And there's not many, if any, people I know that are doing that. I mean, that's some next level commitment.
Thank you, Larry. Yes, that shows. I would like to have my consistency at that time to show my commitment. Yes, and then, because I also at that time after interviewing Joe Pardo, we talk about consistency, right? So, in live streaming, it takes consistency, and yes, people will know us if we are consistent. But then it is much more to be consistent in live streaming. Actually, it takes your self discipline also. The same with podcast. That's why today I asked you to talk about podcast 101, not 1001 night, but only one.
Before long, it feels like it's podcast
uh,
1001 because you're
yes.
constantly learning and the game is constantly changing. And we, as content creators and podcasters, are constantly evolving and changing and trying to keep up with all the latest trends and tips and techniques for staying on top of the podcasting game.
I got it. But we, what is it? Wrap it from 1,001 night into only one night, right? So it will be a long night because I would like to ask you everything to how to prepare a podcast and then also everything one on one, right? So preparing and also launch it and then how to monetize it and how to to motivate ourselves to be in it because there are so many podcasters where uh, they quit before they feel the results from podcasting, right? So
Yeah, it's interesting because depending on your goals for a podcast, you can approach
mm-hmm,
it in a multitude of ways. It really depends on why you have the podcast and what your goals are going to be to accomplish
mm-hmm,
with the podcast. There's a gentleman that his name is Richard Marcinko, and he founded SEAL Team 6 here in the States, the Navy SEALs, the military arm of the Navy that does special warfare and special operations. He had what he called his 7 P's of success. And
hmm.
I took his
What's
seven
that?
P's of success and I modified them just a little bit for
Mm-hmm,
podcasting. So I like to look at podcasting with the 7 P's, and that is proper previous planning prevents poor podcast performance. So if you take the opportunity before you launch a podcast and you sit
mm-hmm,
back and you decide what your goals are for the podcast, what do you want to accomplish with the podcast, that's going to allow us to structure a plan to launch your
mm-hmm.
podcast in a way that brings you much closer to that success that you're looking for as compared to just launching a podcast all willy-nilly and hoping it takes you where you want to go.
Yeah, and how long does it take now? Before talking all night about this, and then please promise me that it is not that long to be famous. Not but Now I'm famous because I know famous people like you also. Okay, let's start it. Podcast 101 with our special guest, Lady Roberts, in episode 4, live stream your business with Sonya. Please comment, please ask anything because Larry is the expert in podcasting. You can interrogate him also if you want to. And then maybe evaluate your podcast because I need to learn this before launching my podcast. So let's start it with the first question, Larry.
Okay.
How to pick the right team for our podcast or the right title or whatever that is, how you may call it.
How
Maybe
do you
the
name your
title.
podcast? How to pick the title? How to pick the name for your podcast?
Mm-mm,
You know,
the
this
team
once
also.
and the theme and the niche of your podcast. There's so
Mm-hmm,
much right there. There's a whole lot in that question because a lot of times people, when they're starting a podcast, they want to name it something fun, something that's a little
mm-hmm,
catchy, something that it might be even a little obscure. And
mm-hmm,
sometimes that can be detrimental to the launch of your podcast. Again, depending on your goals, if you're looking to take your podcast and turn it into a business or even monetize down the road to a certain degree, you want to be able to attract the audience that is relevant to your topic. Or you may want a topic that's relevant to your audience. You can do it however you want to look at it. But at the same time, you want a name that clearly states what that podcast is about.
mm-hmm,
So you don't want people to come across your podcast when it's about business and you have some kind of inside joke type name to it. Granted, that's a lot of fun. And having those inside jokes are great. They're inspirational for you, they're motivational for you. But the
mm-hmm,
downside to it is that people that aren't in the know don't really get the joke. So they may not be listening to your podcast, even though the content is 100% for them. So we got to keep that in mind when we're naming our podcast. Make sure that it's
mm-hmm.
something that's straightforward, that's simple, and that speaks directly to your particular audience.
And then yeah, everyone has their own style, but yeah, I don't want the boring podcast, of course, and I would like to have the great guest in it, not the boring one, the funny one like you, but serious, funny but serious. How do you call it in English?
Both of those work. Both of those work just fine. Yeah.
Hmm. And yes, when we pick our needs, right? There are thousands of podcasts out there. So how do we pick the right one for us
It really
to
depends on
start
what
with?
your
Yes,
what is your why? Why are you doing the podcast?
to be
What is it that
famous.
you want to talk about? What is it exactly? What is it that you can talk about day in and day out? What
Mm-hmm.
are you passionate about? What motivates you as a show host? What's something that you can sit down and you can plan for every week or every day or who
Wow.
knows how, depending on how often you release your podcast, you're
Mm-hmm.
going to be immersed in this content, in this topic each and every day. So when you're picking your niche, when you're picking your topic, you need to look inside first and go, hey, what is it that I'm truly passionate about? What is it that I can truly talk about day in and day out every day of the week? That should be your guide on what your niche is going to be. And
Okay.
that's going to help you because if you pick a topic that you're not interested in, you're not going to talk about it. You're going to fall prey to what they call pod fade. And most new podcasts
Mm-hmm.
they fall out or they fade after 3, 4, 5, even I think 7 episodes is the most that I've heard. But most of them fall off after that time period because people get tired of either talking about what the topic is they chose because they're really not passionate about the topic,
Mm-hmm.
or because they're not getting the results on their podcast that they anticipated right out of the gate. They're thinking they're going to be a top 10 podcast right after that first episode, and they're just not, and they get frustrated. Well, if you pick a topic that you're passionate about, that you truly believe in, that you hold dear to your heart, that you can talk about every day, the odds of succumbing to that pod fade right out of the gate are much, much slimmer.
Wow. So it's not that difficult actually after listening to your explanation about creating the podcast and then also how to maintain it, right? And then how long it should be for the duration of the podcast itself.
I'm not sure I understood.
I mean, how long does it take for us to go podcasting in one episode? Of course, I mean, the ideal time or to the duration time to do that.
For each episode?
Yeah, for each episode, the ideal time for us.
I think there's arguments across the board as to the
Mm-hmm.
ideal length of a podcast. Personally, I don't know that we can determine the overall length or the ideal length of our podcast until
Mm-hmm.
we launch our podcast and see how our audience
Oh,
reacts.
okay, okay.
Some people are going to say, hey, 15 to 20 minutes, that's the best timeline for a podcast. Some people are going to say, oh, I do it 45 minutes to an hour every time. Then you have kind of the outliers that have some extremely successful podcasts, but they also have built-in audiences, and that's a huge differentiator. But their podcasts can go for 3, 4. I listened to a podcast yesterday that nearly went for 5 hours, but it was put on by Jocko. It was the Jocko podcast, Jocko Willink, and his podcasts go for hours and hours at a time. But he has a built-in audience. He has an audience that's willing to listen to the stories that he and his guests are telling, to listen to the messages that he's putting into his podcast. So again, it's very, very difficult to put a timeline on the exact perfect length of a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to vary from topic to topic, host to host, and audience to audience. So launch the podcast with a timeline that you are comfortable with. How long can you talk about a particular topic and keep your audience engaged? That's how long you should do it. Now, once you have a few episodes in the can, once you start getting some feedback from your audience, once you see that they're clamoring for more, if you started a 15, 20-minute podcast, maybe now you extend it to a 30, 40-minute podcast. Maybe
Oh,
it
okay.
continues to grow in length. It simply depends on how long you can maintain the attention of your audience. And you have to look at the analytics to determine that. You have to see what's working, what's not working. Take that into consideration. You can't just throw your podcast out there all willy nilly and hope for the best. We have to look at the responses of our audience. We have to look at the engagement of our audience and determine whether or not we need to make some changes to the way that we're doing this podcast. But just to record the podcast and throw it out there and hope for the best, that generally doesn't
Yes.
work very well.
Just like when we have website and then we expect everyone to go on our website without promoting or advertising, right? And then yes, the same way with podcasts that I learned from you that we really need to plan it and then maybe make it longer when we know our audience already and when we feel comfortable to make it more for the content, right? And then for preparing our podcast content, how long does it take before we launch our podcast? Should we prepare like 1 month content of podcast first, or just like we do it and then we learn learn by doing? Then it will be more and more when we are doing it.
It comes down to, once again, your goals. What are you trying to
Mm-hmm.
accomplish with the podcast? I mean, if you have very clear and specific goals for the podcast, I highly
Mm-hmm.
recommend you plan out and have very specific content that serves a purpose for each and every episode. So if you're launching the podcast, you want to have a back catalog. You want to have a handful of episodes that are
Yes,
there
yes.
to help maintain the flow of the conversation over the weeks and the
Mm-hmm.
months that you're having the podcast get off the ground. So it's great to have that back catalog. How big the back catalog needs to be, again, you're going to talk to different people. They're going to tell you different things. My podcast coach, when I was launching a new podcast, said, Larry, I want you to launch with 25 episodes. And I was like,
Directly.
25 episodes? Bro, I'm not doing 25 episodes. There's no way I'm going to record 25 episodes and launch them all at one time. But he seemed to think it would work. I got to be honest, I didn't do that. So I,
But did
I,
it
I didn't
work?
launch with
Did it work? Wasn't your
I,
client?
I'm not going to say it didn't work. I'm just going to say I didn't do it. So full disclosure right there. I don't
Mhm.
always listen to my coaches. Maybe I should. I don't know. But my point there is that opinions vary so much. Some will say launch with 2 or 3 episodes. Then once again, one of the industry leaders, he's my coach, and he said, "Man, I want you to launch with 25." And so you've got this gamut there that just it runs. It's wide. So again, it depends on what your goals are and how you plan on producing and structuring and directing your show. I definitely think you need a few episodes when you launch. You want to have some stuff
Mhm.
there for people to listen to. If they listen to one episode, they may want to listen to another. And it's great to have that content in the can and also out there
True,
to
true.
really start getting into your fans, these new fans that you're landing,
Oh yes.
and really get their attention and really get them passionate about what you're talking
Mhm.
about. So, a handful of episodes right out the gate. I highly recommend it. Any more than that, I'm gonna leave it up to conjecture, and it's up to you. You can launch with
Oh
as
my
many as you want.
God, it's getting deeper and deeper, and I'm getting more curious. How long can we prepare our podcast before launching? How long do we need to prepare to launch our podcast then?
As far as a timeline goes, for my clients, I give them 6 weeks. We start planning in
Mm,
week 1 and we launch in week 6. We take a date, we put it on the calendar, we say this is launch date, and we take that time to build out the podcast and be prepared for that launch date when we go live. We've got
mhm,
everything in place, from how we're going to launch the podcast, what the name of the podcast is. We do the podcast cover art. We take everything into consideration over that 6 weeks. There's some folks out there, again, they're going to, say, hey, you can launch your podcast in 24 to 72 hours. But can you really? I mean, you can. You can launch it. You can launch it in 5 minutes. Record a podcast and throw it up on a podcast host, and guess what? Now you have a podcast. So you can do it in a matter of minutes. You can take the time to plan it out properly and align your
mhm,
goals with the podcast launch to help. We can't guarantee, but we can definitely put things into to our advantage. We can definitely structure things in a way that will lend itself towards success and accomplishing our goals more so over that 6 weeks than just throwing a podcast out there all willy nilly and hoping for the best.
oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Now, what does it take to launch our podcast?
What does it
Step
take?
by step. Yeah. Maybe, the good equipment, or, you go
Okay,
to salon first if you have the podcast with video, like live streaming. Or
right. I mean, there's a foundation that you're going to want to build first. You're going to want to plan the podcast. Once you know the direction
Mhm,
that you want to take the podcast, now we have to look at how are we going to record the podcast. Is it going to be audio only, or is it going to be video as well? Are we going to live stream our podcast
mhm,
episodes? Depending on where we're taking our show is going to determine what kind of equipment that we need. Now, when
mm,
I say need, I use that word loosely as well because there's so many different options as far as gear goes out there on the market. But I tell my clients right out of the gate, you don't need a bunch of high-end gear in order to get started. You can start a podcast with decent quality gear, great quality gear actually. It sounds tremendous for less than $100. You can get
mm,
you a nice little Samsung Q2U microphone somewhere in the $50 range. That's a great microphone. It serves multiple purposes. It's got an XLR connection, which is the traditional microphone connection. It's got a
mhm,
USB, so you can plug directly into your computer. I mean, great little mic, $50, sounds phenomenal. Then you need something to record on. You need a recording device, whether that's a digital recording device, whether you record directly into your computer, or I
mhm.
mean, record directly into your phone. That's an option as well. So there's a variety of different equipment packages that we can go with depending on budget. Some of these high-end podcasters, you go, but I want to sound like them. I want to use what they use. And that's great. We can do that too. But for professional quality gear, you're going to end up spending a professional quality amount of money as well. So it really depends on your budget. But you do not need to break the bank in order to get started with the podcast. Again, simple mic,
Mhm.
simple recording device, and you're off to the races.
Oh, I think I have a problem with the live streaming on my profile. And
Uh-oh.
please, if you watch this, please watch on the Coaching Universe Facebook fan page, and it will be easier. Or in the group, then our Coaching Universe group. It seems that it doesn't work on my profile. I don't know why. Let me check it. Also in my iPad, it didn't appear for the link. Sorry. Moment.
No
Let
worries.
me check it. Yeah, it works in the group, our Coaching Universe. So if you are there, please do come there and answer the question first before entering the group, so that it will help us to provide the quality content there in the group. But it works also in the YouTube and also in the fan page, our Coaching Universe, right? So that's why, please, if you are here, please give your comments and your questions also for us, because yes, this is very important for us today to start our podcast. And what is the difference between the podcast with video and without video? Because then the people go live streaming first, and then separate in the recording between the video and also the audio, and then put it in the podcast, Larry.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways that we can approach this as well. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, if you're going to be doing live streaming, you're going to need a camera, so that's another piece of equipment that you're going to need right out of the
Mm-hmm.
gate. Now, if you have a laptop, then of course the camera's in the laptop. You could always use that camera to do your live streaming. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
content. Let's talk about the differences between a YouTube video or a video podcast as compared to just an audio podcast. Of course, it's two different types of media, and you got
Mm-hmm.
to think about them slightly differently as well. Depending on what your emphasis is going to be, are you going to emphasize on audio only, or are you going to have more emphasis on the video side of things? If you go from a video perspective, if you're going from a live streaming perspective, you can always take that live stream that you recorded
Yeah.
live, and then you can repurpose that live stream as a video on a YouTube channel or whatever video host you may decide to use. When you're
Mm-hmm.
marketing that video, you have some tools available to you from a video perspective that you don't necessarily have from an audio only perspective. So you got to think about it a little differently. But,
Mm-hmm.
my emphasis is more so on the podcast side. So when you take that audio from the live stream, you want to make sure too that it's, I believe that you want to make it editable. Okay, that's where I emphasize. Live streaming, we sit here, we make a mistake, we're live, it's just going to happen. But sometimes you're going to want to take that audio and turn it into a podcast episode. And for me personally, I recommend that you edit out some of the parts that aren't quite as smooth or aren't quite as easy listening as we may
Mm-hmm.
run into sometimes when we're live streaming. So again, it's two different mentalities, it's two different types of media. Granted, you're having
Okay.
the exact same conversation, you're covering the exact same topic, but they're handled completely differently. And I think that's where the differentiation comes into play, is that a lot of people like to look at their content and they handle it the exact same way. And it's just two totally different worlds. The video world acts one way, the podcast world reacts another way, and you can't use the same tools necessarily to accomplish the same results on the two different platforms.
Wow. And then what kind of platform can we use to create our podcast? And is it expensive to have those platforms? Is there any free platform too?
Hosting a podcast. And for those of you that don't know, when you record a podcast, in order for it to get out to people, for people to be able to subscribe to your show, it has
Mm-hmm.
to be on certain platforms. You have to have a podcast host that distributes your podcast out to these various platforms, whether it's Spotify or iTunes or whatever you listen to your podcasts are. But your host is the one that does that. It's not up to you necessarily to distribute your podcast to all these different locations on the interwebs.
Mm-hmm. I use the
You up
Spreaker.
Spreaker's great. Spreaker's definitely one of
Mm-hmm.
the hosts. You have Anchor. Anchor's a free one. I
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily recommend Anchor, but I'm going to get in trouble. That's very controversial. Some people hate Anchor. Some people love it. But guess what? If
Yeah,
you're
and it
if
is
you're
here in Asia for
Yeah,
free
exactly.
also.
So, it's free. It gives you an opportunity if you're wanting to learn the basics of podcasting and you want to figure out exactly how you're going to do your podcast. using a free platform is a perfect place to do it. Now, me personally, I wouldn't recommend you take your professional content, your
Mm-hmm.
podcast that you're putting everything into, your business by, I wouldn't do it on a free platform. Me personally, I've been a Libsyn guy since day one. I think I've been with Libsyn for about 6 years now, or going on 6 years. We're very, very close there. And
With
they've
Dave
done nothing but
Jackson
great things for
in
me.
lip sync.
I use Libsyn, Libsyn, stands
Yeah,
for
with Dave
Liberated
Jackson. I
Syndication.
think Dave Jackson is also in lip sync, right?
I believe so. Yes, Dave Jackson, I
Mm-hmm.
believe, uses Libsyn. A lot of the we'll call them OGs of the podcast game. A lot of the
Mm-hmm.
original gangsters, they they're on Libsyn because Libsyn's one of the first one on the market, and they still tend
Oh,
to
okay,
lead the
okay.
industry. So they're a terrific company. They've done me
Mm-hmm.
nothing but good. Their customer service is top notch. No, I don't get paid by Libsyn, but I still highly recommend them. It's who I use. It's who I'll continue to use, and I think they're tremendous. Now, if you're listening to this and you're going, well, why do I need a podcast host, and how do they push my podcast out to all these different platforms?
Yes.
What they do for you is you upload your podcast, your episode, each and every episode, you upload it to the host. They maintain that episode on their servers, and they create what is called an RSS feed for you, or a really simple syndication feed for you. What you
Mm-hmm.
do then, and if you don't know what an RSS feed is, it essentially looks exactly like a hyperlink. So if you know of a web address, it looks just like a web address. And you take that RSS feed and they send that, or you can send it sometimes as well. Sometimes you have to set yourself up the first time on some of these platforms. And once you set it up, you just give them your RSS feed. And then every time you upload an episode to your podcast host, it gets distributed out to all the various podcast platforms. So that simplifies the process for you. Most of these hosts are going to have backups of your content. So if something
Mm-hmm.
was to go wrong, they can restore it from backup. You've got copies on file. You've got everything you need right there at your podcast host in case, again, something goes wrong or for distribution purposes.
Wow, that is really, really great. I am lost now, lost in your explanation. I mean, lost in love.
Lost in love. Oh,
Loving to start my podcast again soon because I'm preparing for next month, right? For July for podcast A Minute with Sonya. So only 1 minute podcast, not too long, only some tips, but then I would like to have more when the people give great response to it. So that's why I invite you here to have your free master class actually. About podcast one on one, and you are still with Larry Roberts in podcast one on one. How to start a podcast, how to launch it, and of course, from preparing your podcast until monetizing. And then we have just talked about our platform, how you can record your podcast or also upload your podcast. And this is really great that there are many platforms out there that you can use for podcasting. And then of course you need to pick your theme first, your title that suits you well, that you are passionate about, because if you don't talk something you are passionate about, then you will get bored yourself, you will be bored listening to yourself before launching.
I never get bored listening to myself. It's kind of weird. I don't know. I think that's a
Yes,
podcasting
I know
trait.
you, but what about the introverts? Even just like me, I didn't like my own video on the first time I go live streaming. I went live streaming, you see. So I want
Full
to delete
disclosure,
my own. Yes, sir.
full disclosure, Sonia. I personally, I don't have a problem being on camera. I don't have a
Mm.
problem being on the mic, but I hate still photos of me. I hate seeing photos of myself.
Oh.
I
And
don't know
also
why.
on the stage, you told me that you are not good enough on the stage, right? Then you have to be with me on the stage. I can make people cry, I can make people laugh on the stage, but yes, it is really scary in front of the camera like this, especially when you are alone, when you don't have people to see. Oh, there is a question here. How do you make your podcast popular? How do you get it noticed? This is really interesting. I agree with this question. Thank you so much for asking. Facebook user, I need to see who. Maybe from the group. Larry,
Well,
please answer the question.
I would love to answer that question. You know, there's a variety of ways that you can make your podcast quote unquote popular. And a lot of
Uh-uh.
it comes right out of the gate with our planning. We're planning what the topic is going to be, we're planning what our niche is going to be. And then we launch into that niche and we're speaking to that specific audience.
Mm-hmm.
Many times people launch a podcast, they don't know what niche they're in, they don't know who their audience is. So, I'm not a big fan of the word avatar, but you kind of got to know what your avatar is. And what is that? That is your ideal listener. That is who is going to listen to your podcast. You need to know that right out of the gate. Because if you know who is going to be listening to your podcast, now we know how to market our podcast and who we're marketing our podcast to. And that leads us to a whole nother topic, marketing our podcast. Podcast growth is an overtime project. It takes time for your podcast to catch steam. It takes time for your podcast audience to grow. And I think a lot of folks, they get frustrated. We talked about pod fade already because they come out of the gate and they expect to be a top 10 podcast right out of the gate. And they're
Only in
not.
10 days. I don't think so.
Exactly. And they don't understand why thousands and thousands of downloads aren't in their inbox. That people aren't hitting them up going, great episode. This was tremendous. Thank you for.
Mhm.
It doesn't happen that way.
But
So
I
we
want to
have
have
to.
your voice that way to open my podcast, Larry,
I'm
to
sorry, say that
attract
one more
people.
time.
Just like the voice actor, you know that this is like sorry to interrupt a little bit. Like when I listen to Jodie Krangle, I
Yeah.
love her song, right? So it is very peaceful, very inspiring like this. And you are different. You are like a chillator. Welcome to my podcast, and I would like to have your voice on my podcast to wake up the people to listen to my podcast.
So,
So,
well, that's a key
is it
component there
necessary
too.
also to make your podcast popular that you need to practice your voice also that way?
Well, there definitely is a proficiency measurement involved as well. You need to be
Oh,
able to be
okay.
comfortable on the mic. You need to be able to
Mm-mm.
have a conversation on the mic. You want that energy, regardless of what that energy is. You mentioned Jodie Krangle. She has a beautiful voice. She has a tremendous
Mm-hmm.
podcast. As you mentioned, her and I, our energies are slightly different. Well, slightly different. They're significantly different. And that's cool. But guess what? That means we have two different audiences. So
Yeah.
if you had me in my loud and boisterous and highly energetic tone approach Jody's audience, I'm probably going to turn off a lot of those ears. They're probably not going to be as inclined to listen to me as they are
Mm-hmm.
to listen to Jody. And that's how we grow our podcast. That's how we make our podcast popular. We understand the content and the delivery that our audience is looking for. So we have to structure in a way that our voice, our energy, our direction, it all fits with our audience. And we need to know who that audience is right out of the gate in order to maximize our chances for the success of our show. So that's how you grow your podcast. Find out who you're talking to and find out how to reach that audience. But then also, you have to market the show. Sonya, you brought that up earlier. You have to get on
Mm-hmm.
social media. You have to, I'm a huge believer in the power of showing up. You have to show up. You have to be there. And you go, where is there? It's everywhere. It is a huge challenge to market something like a podcast. Now, I say huge challenge. It's definitely a huge undertaking, but you don't have to spread yourself super, super thin to make an impact, to find your audience. Pick a social media platform that resonates, here we go again, with your audience. Some audiences may be more geared towards being on LinkedIn. If you have a professional podcast that talks about business practices or entrepreneurship or something along those lines, you may be well versed in using LinkedIn and you may be able to tap into an audience on LinkedIn. Maybe you have a different topic that is more suited for a different social media platform. Maybe you're talking about something that resonates highly on Twitter. Maybe you're doing something that's for an older demographic, as much as I hate to admit it, that's on Facebook, because the demographic on Facebook, it's
We're different.
boomers, it's us people here. So so maybe your topic is geared towards a Facebook type audience. You got to find the platform that works best, again, for attracting your audience, but that it all works together around your audience, your marketing, your approach, your tone, your intro, as you mentioned, your energy, the way you use the mic, the way you position yourself on camera, the way you do everything to make your podcast as successful as possible is geared around serving your audience. And if you don't know who that audience is, you're going to struggle.
Wow, that is really, really a great answer for the question. The question comes from Nico Ren in our Coaching Universe Facebook group. And now it works again on my personal profile for our live streaming. Wow, this is great. So please ask your question. Do we need to talk the controversy stuff to make our podcast popular also or get it noticed. For example,
Well,
like this. The 4 a.m. club, right? This is like belief that if you join it, that you will be successful. While the people here wake up at 3 or 4, but they are not successful. Many of us are still starving. So I don't think that waking up at 4 a.m. Will make you successful unless if you really work after when you wake up. So many people also at that time when it started to launch for AM Club. Many people show on the live stream, they are very sleepy, very ugly still after waking up and then hit the gym. So I don't think that is what is it? That suits me well also because when I wake up, I directly become, yeah, sometimes I would like to stay longer, but then I become very, very active. So why should you go live streaming when you look ugly? And I don't like that. You know what I
Well, I think that speaks to the power of the audio platforms that are growing right now. People
Yeah.
love being on Clubhouse because they don't have to get all made up. You don't have to put your
Oh, okay,
makeup on. You
okay.
don't have to get your hair all did or put on your favorite ball
Mm-mm-mm.
cap. You just jump on there and you start talking. And that's
Mm-mm.
one of the powers of podcasting as well. You can record a podcast, audio only podcast, mind you,
Mm-mm.
however you want. You can sit there in your PJs if you want to and record your podcast. So that's really, really convenient there. And I, again, especially in this COVID environment that we've been dealing with over the last year, and I know
Mhm.
everybody's getting kind of tired of hearing about it, but we all got accustomed to only getting ready from the waist up, right? I mean, just about everybody was running around on their Zoom meetings, even at work, in their PJs on the bottom half. Am I right? So that's
Yeah.
that's the way it works. But that's the
And
great
then
thing about
if I
podcasting.
cry because Larry made me cry in the closing of 100 Days Live with Sonya at that time. I should do that in podcast, not in live streaming.
Exactly. You can do the same thing, and you mentioned it
Mhm.
was you brought up an interesting point in that, people are getting up at 4 a.m. and they're trying to use that to be successful. But, Hal Elrod, he's the author of the book called the Miracle Morning, and
Mhm.
he gets up at 4:30, and I think he's one of the front runners of this getting up early and getting things done. But here's my take is that it doesn't matter when you get up. You can get up at 4:30, you can get up at 10:30, doesn't matter. If you don't have the discipline to stay consistent and record your podcast and record your videos and record your live streams and do what it takes in order to lay the foundation for success for your show, regardless of what that show is, regardless of whether you do it at 4:30 in the morning or 10:30 at night, it doesn't matter. If you get up at 4:30 and you still don't have the discipline put in place to do what
Mhm.
it takes to grow your show, to analyze your audience, to look at the analytics behind the show, to go ahead and write out your show notes, to go ahead and plan your next episode, to go ahead and get your social media all lined up and post it to the various platforms that you've decided to use, it doesn't matter. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter when you get up. If at 4 o'clock you get up and you still don't take any steps forward with your podcast, and you still don't plan out your episode, and you still don't understand your audience, and you still don't have any direction, doesn't matter when you get up.
Yeah, so actually, we don't need to talk about the controversy to be popular, right? And then, yeah, it is really bothering me when I see people go live streaming without washing their face first. At least, yeah, I understand if there is a for being vulnerable, but then there is a you know very very thin difference between being vulnerable and look ugly.
Well, I try to do my best, but I generally
No,
still end up in that
no,
ugly
what I mean,
category.
yeah, people can we can be ugly, but we can have charisma. You see what I mean? But at least we clean our face first, or at least brush our hair. So yes, then the people will be encouraged, will be inspired and motivated with our appearance. No need expensive clothes, no need to be sexy, no need makeup. I don't do makeup, even though if I put makeup on the other, they will be beautiful. I know that because I did it many times before, but I cannot make up myself. I'm not patient enough for that. So yes, that's what I mean, Larry. Then my question was like, do we really need to talk about controversy things to be popular in our podcast? Like,
I
you
don't
know.
think so. No,
Mm,
you don't have to cover controversy in order to be popular. Some people enjoy the
mhm.
controversy. Some people, that's the audience that they're going for, are people that like controversy. And believe me, there's
Mhm.
plenty of it out there for you to
Yes,
capitalize on.
right.
And if that's your thing, then by all means, that's great. It's definitely a lane that you can pursue. But no, you don't have to be controversial. You don't have to say wild and wacky things. You don't have to offend one group to get the support of another group. None of that has to take place in order for your podcast to be successful. All you have to do for your podcast to be successful is A, know your goals, know your audience, and follow through. That's it. And success is defined differently depending on different shows and different people. People may find their podcast successful with one listen, with 5 listens, with 50. Who knows? Everybody's
Mhm.
goals are different. And I think once we start understanding that and we can answer within ourselves, what's my goal for my podcast? What do I consider my podcasting success? And then here's a critical component. Then we maintain our expectations and we keep our expectations in line with our goals. So people look to
Wow.
Joe Rogan all the time and they go, "Oh, I want to be the next Joe Rogan." And I'm like, I don't want to be, a downer here, but odds are you're not going to be the next Joe Rogan. And I don't say that to be mean, but sometimes we got to have that reality check and look at, why is Joe Rogan even so popular in the first place? Well, Joe Rogan's been in the entertainment industry for decades. He was on TV in the 80s. He was the host of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. The man sells out stadiums, not just clubs,
Mm.
stadiums with tens of thousands of people for his
So
comedy. He
yes,
has a
to not.
massive following, a massive audience. And that is what makes his podcast massively successful. So you got to look at the fact that he's been doing this for decades, tens upon tens upon tens of years in order to get where he's at. And then we launch our podcast and we think we're going to do that in tens of days. And sometimes that can be kind of disappointing.
Wow. So yes, to not compare with the others who have already started first, and and then also to not compare yourself with the others. I cannot be Oprah Winfrey, even though if I want to, because of my English is not like Oprah Winfrey, for example. So, but I just want to be Sonya, the famous Sonya, right?
That's what it's all about. Being authentic, being who you are, being yourself. You were talking about getting all dolled up with our makeup and getting our hair did and everything, and that's
Mhm.
great. But show up authentically as well. Now, showing up authentically doesn't mean rolling out of bed and getting on the mic and going, "Hey, good morning, everybody. It's the podcast." That that's not necessarily authentic. But when you're
Mhm.
on the mic, when you're on camera, be who you are. Reach your audience. Be in touch with those that you're speaking to and come and show yourself in a way that speaks to that audience. And again, I think we have this theme throughout this conversation we've been having, where it's knowing your audience, knowing who you're talking to, and making sure that everything you do throughout your podcast, with the social
Mhm.
media, with the planning of the episodes, with the presentation on the microphone, with the presentation on the video, make sure you're talking to them.
Wow. 1001 night becomes only one night, and then actually, it should be on some episodes of live stream your business with Sonya for only about podcast, right? But then I would like to discuss everything today, so that next time there will be another topic for podcast, because this is really important for us now also in live streaming industry, right? And talking about success, what is the measurement for the success itself? Is it when we get the sponsors for our podcast, or to monetize our podcast already, that we can get the income from our podcast?
That could definitely be a form of success. And it goes back to our plan. Was that part of our plan out of the gate? Did we plan to monetize the show? And if we
Mm-hmm.
do plan to monetize the show, if we do look at that as our measurement of success, how are we planning to monetize the show? Are we going to
Mm.
monetize through sponsorships? Are we going to monetize through joint ventures with other podcasters, maybe, or other content creators? Are we going to monetize through YouTube? Are we going to be one of the YouTube monetization platforms? After you get 1,000 subscribers, you can start monetizing, or you can apply to start monetizing your YouTube channel. So, are you going to go that route? Are you going to look
Mm.
at merchandising? Are you speaking to a specific audience that might like some merch that it ties back to the podcast? Can you do t-shirts? Can you do some sort of item, something that someone could buy, some little trinket or something that relates to the topic of the conversation, the topic of the podcast? So there's a variety of different ways that you can monetize. Advertising and sponsorship, definitely not just the only one. You know, my podcast opened a variety of doors for joint ventures with other content creators. I created courses as a joint venture. I wrote a book as a joint
Mm.
venture. I continue to help put on shows as joint ventures. The podcast opened a variety of doors for me to monetize in a number of different ways. So much so that I was able to walk away from my 21-year career on January 4th of this year to podcast and create content full time. So, with the proper plan in
Wow.
place, you can accomplish whatever those goals are that you may have. But you got to know what they are right out of the gate so that you can constantly direct your efforts to accomplishing those goals.
And the baby Yoda behind you, is that your mark?
Is that my mark? No, the baby Yoda, man. You know, I got sucked into the show. You know, the Mandalorian, when it came
Mm.
out, I saw the little baby Yoda guy, and I had to have him. I had to be like everybody else. I had to be one of the cool kids. So I reached out and had to get me a baby Yoda to put down there.
Oh, I thought that that is your merch that you provide for your friends on the podcasting and also live streaming. So,
It's a conversation starter. How's that?
hmm, that's great. And then also, yes, to monetize it, whether through the sponsorship, and then also the joint venture that I'm interested in. What kind of joint ventures do we usually have in the podcasting industry?
Well, you could always collaborate with other podcasters. You could collaborate
Mm-hmm.
to create videos. You could collaborate to create a video series, an instructional, a course. You could write books. There's a variety of different things that you can do with your podcast and joint ventures with other podcasters. They may have original content ideas as well that you can work with and both work together. You know, the biggest thing that you do here is you focus on building the relationships. And I
Mm.
mentioned at the start of this conversation how the podcasting community was such a tight knit community and everybody's looking to uplift their fellow podcasters.
Yes, I
Those
love that.
relationships, so critical, so critical. Now, they may not lead directly to downloads. They may not necessarily listen to all of your content. Because if you're looking for podcasters to listen to your podcast, unless your podcast is about podcasting, podcasters probably aren't going to listen to your podcast. How do you like all that?
Yeah,
But
but this is
that's
what I love from you also. You speak the truth that maybe everyone do not want to hear, but they want, they have to hear it, to be successful, to be well known also in the podcast.
well, it's funny because I moderate a few podcasting groups on Facebook, and you
Mm.
see folks wanting to post their latest episodes in threads in these podcasting groups. And unless, again, your podcast is about podcasting, guess what? Most of the podcasters that are in that podcast group, they're not going to listen to your show because you know why they're in that group? Because they want you to listen to their show. So
Yes,
it's a
for
scenario that
certain
goes,
day, for the advertisement day, how do you call it? Oh, sorry, for the
no, you're
promotion day.
fine.
For the promotion day, right? Yeah, there are such kind of members also who do not want to share the values first, but only promote. Yeah, sometimes I become that way also because there are so many groups that I don't know which one that can be profitable or bring benefit for me also.
Well, again, it goes back to knowing your audience. If you're posting your episodes in a podcast group on Facebook, that's
Mm-hmm.
probably not your audience, and you're probably not going to see much return on the time it took for you to make that post, if they even allow those posts. There are some groups that just don't allow self promotion, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason behind that, and I totally support that concept. But don't fall prey to that. Don't fall prey to thinking that if you post your episodes into podcasting groups, you're necessarily going to be benefiting from that. Because again,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Okay,
probably
okay.
not your audience. Know your audience, know who you're talking to, and find ways to reach out on social media and connect to those potential listeners. But they have to be listeners that would be interested in the content and the value that you're providing through your podcast.
Wow, thank you so much, Larry. This is a lot. I'm very, very happy to get it from you. You know, the honest ways to what is it, to create our podcast also. So yes, it's almost 1 hour. I don't feel that.
It goes by quick when you're talking about something you're passionate about.
That's why I love this. And then, yes, I don't know how long do you have time still? Because there are some question about monetizing also. And when we have already done the right steps, we discussed before, from preparing, launching, and then of course, to be consistent with the consistency in our podcast. How long does it take until someone will be interested to sponsor our podcast, or how can we monetize it after this? How long does it take for us to be able to monetize our podcast from the
It
launching?
depends
I
on
mean,
it depends on how well you can clearly define your audience.
mm,
You can get sponsors right out of the gate before you even launch an episode. If
oh,
you have a clear and concise plan and you put forth the effort to gaining those sponsorships. If sponsoring is the way that you want to go, then by all means, guess what? You're going to need to have a plan. You're going to need to have that plan in writing. You're going to need to have it lined out exactly how you will plan on finding your audience, reaching that audience, and converting that audience into purchases for your sponsors. They're sponsoring you
mm,
not necessarily because they like your show or they like your content. They're sponsoring you because why? Because they expect a return on that investment. So it's no different than having a business plan, because that's essentially what it is. If you're looking to monetize your podcast, no matter how small it is, now you're taking your hobby podcast, your fun little podcast, and guess what you're doing? You're turning it into a business. So if you want to monetize that, guess what you have to do? You have to treat it like a business. And so
not as
many
a
times we have
hobby.
podcasters, exactly. So many times we have podcasters that have hobby podcasts, and they're great. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a hobby podcast. They are a ton of fun. My very first podcast was a hobby podcast, and I had a blast with it, and you will too. But understand that when we start talking monetization, now we have to start thinking about our content
Mm,
differently. We have to start thinking about our content in a way that will convert, that will allow our sponsors to get a return on their investment for sponsoring our show. And that's where the difference comes into play. So if you want to start monetizing, even if you're not trying to land sponsors right out of the gate, say you've built an audience and now you have listeners that you can count on. You've got a fairly decent, reliable number of downloads every month, every episode, and you're doing really, really well. And now you're going to reach out and try to gain sponsors. You still have to have a plan in place. You can't just go, "Hey, sponsor my show, would you?" And then they're going to sponsor it. You have to be able to show potential sponsors how they're going to get a return for sponsoring your show. And you want to focus on sponsors that, once again, speak to or provide products for or provide assistance to your audience. So, again, you'll notice the theme here. Everything revolves around one thing. What is it, Anita? What is it? It revolves around your audience. Everything revolves around your audience. So know your audience. Be able to put a plan together when you reach out to your sponsors, describe your audience, show proof of your audience, and move forward from there.
Wow, this it's been a great chat with you, Larry. I don't want to end it actually because there are so many things that we can discuss in this. But yes, time runs very fast, and if you want to know further about podcasting, please contact Larry Roberts on podcastboost.com, or you can also join us on our coaching universe Facebook group. If you love our content like this, then we can provide more content like this that will be useful for you to go live streaming and then to go podcasting that can grow your business and also of course increase your profit in live streaming industry. So Larry, thank you very much for being here again in episode 4, live stream your business with Sonya. I'm very happy and feel honored to have you today, and I hope that we can talk again next time. And of course, do not forget to join us in the online World Summit for live streamers with Sonya. The next season is in September, the 20th until 24th. So then I hope that you can sponsor me again. Yippee!
Hopefully, this time I'll be able to show up and speak. That'd be great.
Yes, you have to. Maybe a double session for the masterclass.
Oh, there you
1
go. Maybe
hour.
we'll do a double. We'll do a double. There you go. I love it.
Oh, then yes, you pay for that. Thank you. You pay for the first season that you couldn't make it. You see that I love it. That so you will
Again, it goes
perform
back to
double on the
support, man.
masterclass.
It
Thank you
goes back
so
to
much,
supporting us.
Larry. Thank
So,
you so much. So yes, again, if you would like to watch the replay here, please put the hashtag replay and then also your comments and what do you want to what's next in live stream your business with Sonya. Maybe you want to what's about Larry Roberts in the next episode, or they're expert about podcasting and then how to plan your podcast and then how to launch it. If you would like to join his masterclass, please also connect with him in podcastboost.com, or how can we reach you on easily, Rennie?
yeah, it's just like that. Go to podcastboost.com. You can reach out to me there, or you can just shoot me an email directly, Larry at podcastboost.com. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Feel free to reach out on social media as well. I'm on all the social medias. I'm on the Facebooks and the Twitters and the LinkedIns. So I'm pretty easy to find. Reach out, please. I'd love to work with you.
Thank you very much once more for being here, and I'll see you guys, our universe, in next Tuesday with a different topic. And I'll see you, Larry. Thank you very much again for everything you present tonight. I'm very, very, I really appreciate it because this is a lot of values and knowledge, and of course based on your experiences in podcasting that you didn't hide anything and then become very, very open to us about the weaknesses for being a podcaster, and also how to be to gain the profits from podcasting itself for our business and our life. Again, thank you very much, Larry, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you. Terry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Will it be on the live streaming then? My voice?
I can
No.
hear you. So are we still on camera here?
Yes. Oh, no, not in camera. Already with the music, right?
Oh, okay, good.
Thank
All
you
right, well,
so much.
yeah, thank you. But I got to run. But touch
Yes.
base with me. I appreciate you for having me. Thank you so much. And we'll do it again, okay?
Thank you so much, Larry. Have a great day.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.